Hello, hello. Welcome to Dog Eared Thoughts. I'm Michael, and I'm so glad you're here. Uh, Different location today. I'm traveling, but wanted to get this one out and talk a little about a book I just finished last week, and it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. So definitely want to talk about it. It is Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chizmar. And I'm sorry, I can't work my camera. Anyway, um, and this book is incredibly unique. And I'm going to dive into it a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the how Richard came up with this idea and the unique approach about this book. And then on top of that, just what I thought about it, because it was, in my opinion, extremely unique. A really great example of some super creative writing, taking real life and fiction and merging it together in a way that, um, even though you read in the very, one of the very first pages of the book that tells you that this is a work of fiction, by the time you're done, you are Googling and trying to figure out if any of this is real and trying to do your own true crime detective work. So let's buckle up and see how this goes. All right, so let's jump on into it. So Richard Chismar, he uh, grew up in Edgewood, Maryland, which will come into play very soon, and trust me, I'll talk to you about that. Um, and he actually cut his teeth in terms of writing and kind of putting together publishing. He actually created a kind of a horror magazine that called Cemetery Dance, and that rolled out um, right around 1988 and was really successful as it continued. Had short stories by other famous horror novels authors, including Stephen King, and it really was high on the circulation list. It actually became a book in print in '92, and has continued to put out different hardcovers, novellas, anthologies, all kinds of things across, and is really considered a high part in the horror press genre. He Chismar also has worked with Stephen King. Stephen asked him to kind of contribute to a story that he couldn't, he was struggling with, that he called Gwendy's Button Box. And Chismar took it and kind of expanded it into a novella, and was very popular and has been, and is an extremely good book. So it is definitely something worth checking out. So, he definitely has, Chismar has definitely cut his teeth in the horror genre. As for where did this book come from? This book is set in Chismar's hometown of Edgewood, Maryland. And the basic premise of this book is Chismar, who is a character in his own novel, talks about growing up in this town, um, going to college, coming back, and settling in to try to figure out what is he going to do with the rest of his life, and actually starting a horror magazine. So definitely art imitating real life. But then the crux of the book is there's a series of murders in this small town, horrible murders of young women, and uh, he gets involved in kind of the true crime investigation into who this murderer is, what's going on, and how can he help solve it. But it is truly written with a view of a true crime book, and has an incredible approach to that. The one thing that um, Chosmar does so well is he balances the reality of uh, his parents, his friends, the town itself, people in the town. While he may have tweaked the names slightly, these are all people that he knows, and he based all of that on his real people in his real life. Uh, the only thing that isn't the same necessarily is the murders, the murderer, and kind of the approach in terms of how they caught the killer, or how they try to catch the killer and investigate that piece. Uh, but he did base it on some level of reality. So, and it's actually in the book, so that none of this is spoilers. That there was in the late 80s in Edgewood uh, a person that they called the Phantom Fondler in Edgewood, where a masked man would break into women's bedrooms in the middle of the night, and he would touch their hair, their legs, or whatever, and when they woke up, he would run away. And it happened about half a dozen times. The police increased patrols, people bought locks. Like some of the reactions that people had to this real life thing echoes in the book when the fake murder or the murderer. Um, and so Chismar took that as, what if this was more than just someone touching or breaking in and caressing someone's feet? What if this became more violent? And so that is how the story started and how he grew from there. Um, and the other piece that Chismar has said is that it gave him an opportunity to um, revisit his parents and what was it like growing up with them. Um, and so it was, you can tell that there's very deeply personal approaches, especially when him as his own character is talking to his parents. Um, there's a lot of, you can tell, personal conversations that may have actually happened in different settings, uh, and you could see the personal piece of that, and that really, it shines through. And if anything, I think the town and his love for that town growing up um, becomes kind of a third or fourth character within the book itself, and you really kind of can relate to yourself being in there. Now, if you only grew up in a large city or something like that, it might be hard to relate to. But I think if you grew up in any uh, sizable suburb or smaller town or medium-sized town, you can absolutely find a way to relate to the town that was, and how did it react to these series of situations as well. Chismar also used true crime novels as kind of his making sure that he was telling a story that resonated in that regard. So one of them was absolutely Michelle McNamara's "I'll Be Gone in the Dark." I would say you could definitely see the Zodiac, the book related to that, as something that is absolutely fits into this as a potential. And just the way that he himself kind of puts himself into this, and kind of finds a way to show like the obsession of a writer or journalist on trying to catch a killer, and pull all the strings to try to find how can we catch this killer. So that is some of the background and the believability related to this story, and he builds it in such a way that it is absolutely spot on realistic, and really you find yourself so immersed in that you really do lose the fact that this is not a true story and not a nonfiction book. A little bit about the plot, but we'll dive into it a little bit deeper. So the premise of this book is that Richard Chismar writes as himself in the summer of 1988. He's returning back from college with a journalism degree, and instead of obviously jumping into kind of journalism, he wants to write horror stories. He wants to put together a magazine, and and that's where he sees his career. He has a girlfriend turned fiance and wife during the course of this story, but he also pulls together, his friends. In fact, and kind of really talks about what it was like growing up in Edgewood. In fact, the whole first chapter or so is absolutely a deep dive into small town living, what it was like growing up there, who his friends were, and all of that, which, when you first start it, may feel like it's extra and unnecessary, but without that, the rest of the town's reaction, I think emotionally as a reader, you would not be as tied to what occurs. So what occurs is that during the summer of his return, girls start disappearing, and It starts with and four teenage girls, and he doesn't necessarily know them directly. They are friends of friends or siblings or people that they just know around the neighborhood, as they're younger than he is. So he may have, vaguely remember them as little kids when he was a teenager. Um, but the reality is somewhat the same thing. They either vanish, get taken from their bedrooms, or they get taken from their driveway right before they get home, um, and are then left and found in a very public space in kind of a ritualistic fashion. And I will say Chismar does a good job of not getting too graphic. He definitely doesn't speak about um, the act itself, but because he's writing as someone trying to solve a mystery in a true crime, you get the direct information of like, this is what the police said, this is what the news said, here's some things that the police didn't release to the press, and facts like that. So you gain a lot of that. So you feel like you are following along with all of this. Um, and Chismar has a friend who is a journalist, who is really deeping dive and getting some behind the scenes information. So he's able to kind of piece that together of how they get across, and try to solve this, and whether or not this will ever be solved, and who could it be, as they try to narrow suspects down and whatnot. Uh, and, what I will say is that the book, because it is written as a kind of true crime, uh, after the fact kind of book, uh, it doesn't do what other fictional books do when you're hunting a killer, which is you invariably get a chapter or two where you're in the killer's mind and trying to figure out what the killer's motivation is, or learn a little bit more about like why or anything like that. You get more of it's more autobiographical, and you really just are focused on Chismar's point of view as a character in this book, and a writer, and not and someone who lived through these acts versus the person themselves. And so, what's good about that is that you're constantly left with a little bit of why. Uh, as you get through the book, you never, it takes you a long time to try to figure that out, until kind of somewhat of towards the epilogue piece of it, really. Um, what I will say is, the ending lands, and it is somewhat predictable in a way that, it does a little bit of creates a very stereotypical serial killer, absolutely based on reality, which makes it not unrealistic, but it is one of those things where you just kind of feel like the killer is doing what they did, and it's just like, okay, well, that's not necessarily special, but it is still, grim and grisly, um, and all of the things that go along with that. Um, the themes are absolutely kind of loss of innocence, especially, and it's interesting, the time and place for the book of being in the late 80s. Uh, Especially nowadays, people look back at that time, whether you're, my age or older or even younger, people kind of look back at the late 80s, 90s, early 90s as this kind of innocent time before the internet and before technology and all of these things that we kind of sometimes lament, nowadays. And so you throw that into a small town and the loss of innocence, and the rocking of a world where we've never had something like this happen before is absolutely one of the bigger themes within that. The other piece is really kind of a meta approach of like, what is the fascination with true crime? And especially towards the end where, Chismar's writing as himself of saying like, well, I was, here's the press and here's what people, what's the fascination of it. And obviously some of it is late 80s, early 90s. CNN was emerging and out there. And so that becomes a character kind of behind the scenes of like the news, and as it becomes more national news and things like that, the killings, and so kind of working through that, and so it is very much a kind of a little bit of a commentary on things that we now see with all the podcasts out there of true crime and all the other things that are, and shows, um, continual interest and curiosity in society, especially at least especially in America, of true crime and what's going on with all of that. But I will say, again, this is such a unique book in terms of it kind of invents a new genre in terms of it's written so well in a non-fictional language that it just kind of transcends any fiction and nonfiction. It just kind of it blends it so perfectly that it is just kind of a new kind of approach in that regard. Um, and, you know, obviously Stephen King wrote a blurb about how much he liked it. Harlan Coben even said, raved about it. Um, it, it I will say that this is one of those books that captures the imagination and really kind of you know jumps out of that. Again, I would say from a criticism standpoint, I think again if you can't relate to a small town or even medium-sized town or even sometimes the 80s or early 90s, you may struggle with that, but I think you can kind of take yourself out of that and just kind of enjoy the story, focus on the story as it is. um, and again, the ending, without giving it away, and or the serial killer's kind of motivations, may seem a little stereotypical, but it's not doesn't make it any less gruesome or grim. And quite frankly, I think finding out who it is a bit of a gasp, or a jaw dropper. Um, and so he did a good job of kind of building that up and finding parts of that out there. Um, so absolutely, I think it's one of those emotional projects that you can tell that it was deeply personal for Chismar, not only for the town and kind of his love letter to growing up in that place, but kind of revisiting his parents, his friends, being able to put himself in those situations and back in that world, was I think was absolutely, you could tell, key, and he was putting himself in there, and you felt like you were right there with him. And the town itself is real. The description of kind of the how the town came to be and evolved, all of that is real, and really kind of speaks very well to the type of world that we're in, and how that small towns evolve over time, especially those, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on. Like it just, towns kind of ebb and flow, and this absolutely shows all of that. And so, I gotta say, I think, it's one of those things that it has a certain kind of working class world to it, and kind of leans into that a little bit. And so sometimes, as a reader, that might be annoying or kind of takes you out of the story. But I think it is, again, the town itself is a character within the book. So that's Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chizmar. It is definitely one of those books that's, I think you could tell, difficult to describe necessarily to someone. And I think it's one of those things where you don't want to make it sound like there's a gimmick to it, but also it is so well done, and kind of meta fiction, or whatever. But yet it's not hokey. It doesn't try to trick the audience. It tells you up front what it is, and as a reader, if you get immersed in it and kind of lose that piece, that's okay. That absolutely is a great positioning and great reading on that one. And it's a personal story, and I think that even if the murder part of the story is not, may not be real, the story and the characters and everyone else around all of that is real, and it's just it's really good, and it really kind of hits the right spot depending on where you are with that. So I'd love to hear what you all thought of it. If you've read it, if you haven't, definitely check it out. As you can tell, I got it from the library, so hey, once again, visit your library, support that. Yeah, definitely let me know what you think. If anything else in Chizmar's world, even his magazine, and have you read that? Any thoughts on that? Are we excited about it? And can't wait to share my next read with you all. So, like and subscribe, and enjoy all your reading out there, folks. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.